Today for social studies, we are going to start a new unit. This one is about our government and how our government works. And in order for you guys to understand some of the things that we do now, we need to go over some of the stuff that happened a long time ago and how our country got started. This will be a review for us because we did learn this earlier in the year. But basically, our country is hundreds of years old, and some of the things we do now is because of things that happened back then, when our country first started hundreds of years ago, which is really awesome. You know, it's like we learned our lessons then so that now we can make things better. So we're going to go all the way back to the beginning. So we have talked about this year how we all know this is a globe, right? This is our world that we live in. This is the United States of America over here. This is where we live, right? Well, when God first made people and, you know, the Garden of Eden, right? That was all over here. Our Bible stories, this is where our Bible stories are. This is where Jesus lived. This is where all of that happened, way in the beginning. And then as more and more people started to cover the earth because, you know, they had children and their children had children and their children had children and their children had children, they started to spread out, right? All over this whole part of the earth. But we talked about how on this side, over here, nobody was over here. This was pretty empty. So then some people came over from this way into this land where we live now, and those were the Native Americans. And a little bit later, people came over from Europe, and they started to live on this land as well. So now we have all these people coming over in ships from Europe that are starting to live on this land. We learned about them this year. We learned that some of them were the Pilgrims, right? We learned a little bit about Christopher Columbus. He was another explorer. And so there's a country called England over here, and they had a king. His name was King George. So people were coming from England to live in this new land because there was so much land that they could live on. They could spread out, and they had religious freedom here. They could worship God however they wanted. So these people came over here from England, and England continued to tax those people. So your parents and I pay taxes, and that money goes towards things that like we all share. So things like roads, things like police officers, things like firefighters and traffic lights. It goes towards all of those things that you really don't think about, like, who pays for that, right? Well, we all do. We all pay our taxes, and it goes towards those things. So these people were being taxed. But they weren't allowed to vote. So your parents and I, we pay taxes, and then we vote for the people, like our president and we learned about governors and mayors. We vote for all of those people. And sometimes we win and sometimes we don't, right? We know that it's only fair though, you know, whoever gets the most votes is the winner. These people were told that they're not allowed to vote. So they're still paying money, but they're not allowed to vote for the person in charge of all that money. That seemed really unfair. And they got tired of that, obviously, right? They were not happy about sending all of their hard-earned money so that they could not have a say in how it was spent. So a bunch of men sat down and they wrote a letter to the king. And this letter was called the Declaration of Independence. That is a very big word, right? Or 3 words. So, declaration basically just means we're declaring it. We're saying it. This is what we're saying, okay? So they were declaring independence. Independence means that they want to be, no, we want to be separate from you. We want to be on our own. We don't want to be a part of England anymore. So they were declaring that they wanted to be their own country. They signed this letter on July 4th, 1776. And we celebrate that day because that was the day that our country first said, you know what, we want to be free. And so we celebrate that day. It's a holiday. Can you guess what holiday it is? It's the 4th of July. We celebrate that every year, and we have fireworks and parades, and we all wear red, white, and blue because those are our country's colors, right? So it's also known as Independence Day. So when we talk about it, just in regular conversation, we just call it the 4th of July, but really its formal name is Independence Day because that was the day that we said we are independent, we are separate from you, we don't want to be a part of England anymore. So, the first man, your book also mentions this, the first person to sign that letter was John Hancock. Just a fun fact. And yeah, so they sent it over to the King of England, King George. Now stop and think. When he got that letter, how do you think King George felt about that letter? He probably wasn't too happy, right? Well, you're right. So anyway, we're going to get into that a little bit more, but this is how our country started. We said, you know what? It's okay to pay taxes, but if we're going to pay taxes, we want to be able to vote. We want to be able to have a say in what happens with that money. And we also said, we want to be separate from the King of England. And nowadays, we have a good relationship with England. They're our friends, but back then we were not too pleased with them and they were not too pleased with us. So that is how our country started, with a bunch of men who sat down and wrote a letter and they said, we're done. And also that letter was signed in Philadelphia, not too far from where we live. So that's pretty cool. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you later.